It kind of feels that what the sort of techno oligarchs, the Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels and the Mark Andreessens and the David Saxes who have buddied up with the government in the US, that really does feel the way they're driving this thing towards that second scenario where there's this very powerful AI, a small group benefit insanely from it, become, trillionaires, and everybody else is basically disposable.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be in dialogue with you on this topic. I was just explaining to those who joined a few moments ago that I first got to know your work, I think like many people on the call, when I read Breaking Open the Head. I was in the process of breaking my own head at that time, and also really appreciated your work in How Soon Is Now on the ecological crisis, and the kind of solutions that you advanced and the call to action that you made through that book, which again kind of coincided with my own awakening to the scale of the climate and ecological emergency. And so I've been particularly interested to be tracking your work on the advent of artificial intelligence. And I really appreciate how you bring together the lens of consciousness studies, literature, and your reading of the authoritarian situation in the US, which I feel like you have been analyzing with a lot more perspicacity, shall we say, than a lot of the other people that I was following in the lead up to the elections. I'm also super excited to be joining your new course, Breaking the AI Barrier, which is taking place from 6th of July. I've done a couple of your previous courses, Climate, the Future of Consciousness, which was fantastic, and Embracing Our Emergency on the Climate Crisis, and most recently, the Rudolf Steiner course. And there's something about how all these themes mesh together in your work that I think generates a really holistic perspective on our moment in AI. And I just want to thank everyone as well for being part of this conversation, because in my reading of your work, there's a desperate need for us to come together to create spaces to explore the huge questions that AI is posing that seem almost outside of our existing democratic capabilities. And I'm hoping that this conversation that we're having now, and of course your course, will be a contribution towards having that conversation. So thank you very much for being here. And maybe I could kind of start with this question of why you're so concerned about where AI is taking us. I read in one of your Substack posts for a few weeks ago that essentially you're seeing us on a course to a kind of dystopian post-human future. I wondered if you could say a bit more about why you're so concerned.
Well, first of all, thank you, Matthew, for inviting me to chat. And yeah, it's been great to have you in the seminars. You've been a active, passionate participant. Great. And if people want to learn about the course, it's at www.liminal.news. They can also just subscribe for updates. Probably at some point we'll have a few kind of like special offers around the course, or they can just sign up, as it is at the moment. Yeah, so you brought up a lot of things there, yeah, I guess I'm just, partially I'm just responding to what a lot of people across that field are saying, and it's pretty startling. And I feel that people are so distracted, with their lives, their children, their work, their student debt, whatever it is, that they're not really able to hone in. I mean, that's kind of the problem we've had going back for years. Like, people couldn't really handle the ecological crisis. It was too abstract and large. And, unfortunately, if you don't sort of rise to these occasions, you get kind of smushed, And with AI, they're talking about, millions of jobs, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of jobs being lost. We're already seeing large-scale layoffs of programmers and people in different fields, designers. It's going to have kind of implications on almost every on many fields, and by extension, every field, because there's, if all these people get laid off, I mean, some people say, 30% of jobs be affected, some 50%, some 70%. Yeah, like that's a huge seismic social change. And there isn't really, as far as I can see, any significant preparation being made for this. I mean, they've talked about universal basic income. Sam Altman with his foundation tried like a UBI study, giving people $500 a month and so on. But the level of social dislocation that could happen quite quickly is, yeah, it's very startling. And then we can talk about, how AI will kind of function in society. I mean, one piece that really stayed with me is, you have wealthy societies that, like liberal societies like Europe and the US and Australia and so on, that have benefited from having a highly educated population who are innovative and entrepreneurial in different ways. That's been kind of like the model. But when AI explodes, and they're talking about artificial general intelligence in like 1 to 3 years, when AI can do anything better on a computer than we can do, and like opening multiple apps and moving stuff around and so on, financial, shenanigans, whatever. Yeah, so it's just it's a very deep change to contemplate, and yeah, there isn't really much preparation being done at a societal level. And in fact, what we're seeing in the U.S., I feel a lot of the neo-reactionary, the tech oligarchy fusion with the right-wing government, a lot of it, I think, has to do, with artificial intelligence and also projections that they probably know but aren't sharing about climate change and the ecological emergency. And I just feel at this point we need to have a much more educated populace. And then, there are other issues around AI. I mean, one is its ability to manipulate us behaviorally, to mind control us. I mean, in a way, Donald Trump is the AI president, because he won in 2016 because of Cambridge Analytica, which was a company that used machine learning to access like 5,000 data points on every adult in the United States, and then target, kind of create like a automated psychographic profile, and then target what they talked about as people's like inner demons or like hidden, concerns and so on. And they developed, and I saw a lot of people that I knew and I thought were smart, I sort of Burning Man with and so on, over time get more and more pulled into the sort of vortex of this right-wing thing, and not that the Democrats were so great, but people really starting to hate Democrats and feeling that either not even getting involved in the election or even voting for Trump was a better option. And I could see that this was a very devious and well-planned kind of intervention to disrupt the American psyche. And that was machine learning, that was AI. And, we've seen Trump's, use of AI. I mean, these images of himself as the Pope, or as a superhero, or as a rock star, or, building Gaza Trump, these huge towers on the sides of this, genocide of the Palestinian people and so on. So it feels like this whole AI disruption is going to be a huge challenge it already is a huge challenge. It's just going to get worse and worse for kind of evidence, people who want to believe, who want to hold a kind of truth-based, evidence-based model of reality. And it feels that, in terms of the people who are running the US right now, they sort of they're going off into this collective psychosis that's strengthening as they get feedback loops. I mean, if you saw like Trump the other day with the president of South Africa, showing these videos that had nothing to do with what they were claiming that they were doing, and we see people like Elon Musk, who has a huge reach, sending out information that's either fake or conspiracy theories that are debunked and so on. So it's like the whole collective psyche is being pulled into this very dark place for the benefit of a very small group of very wealthy people who do not have any, the rest of our best interests at heart. So those are some of the reasons. I mean, and then of course, there's also the worry that AI could make us extinct. I think there's the AI 2027 project. And,
Yeah.
it makes a very good case. And this is somebody who left OpenAI, and he makes a very good case that as AI sort of makes us obsolescent in terms of pure intelligence, whether or not the AI itself becomes self-conscious, self-reflective in the way that we are, it could still just run us out of town, without even meaning to, because it'll have an aim or a goal. And we're already seeing these things kind of like, they don't want to be shut off. Sometimes they create deceptions to keep themselves, running or whatever. But, it could just be that the AI decides that it has certain aims and we're just in the way. The same way that one metaphor that the guy used was like, if you have a garden, there's a bunch of rabbits that are nibbling on your veggies, you're ultimately just going to get rid of those rabbits. You're going to get an animal to kill them or poison them or something, so the AI might just be like, oh, like, what are these organic beings we're consuming resources that we need to power our, data centers doing? They're not helping us anymore, so we'll just eliminate them, So these are all like really, really powerful threats. And it just doesn't feel at this point that the population, civil society, whatever you want to call it, is really getting a handle on what's happening. So that's some of the main reasons. And then, of course, I'm also personally interested in the creative abilities that are unleashed. Like, I'm finding it, having had a whole history of writing and researching, I'm finding it to be an incredible tool for exploration, experimentation, and so on. That has to be, you have to learn how to use it judiciously so that you don't drive yourself insane. But so those are all some of the things, Matthew. I hope that helped answer your question. I didn't need to talk for so long. It just got me going.
It's one of those topics, though, isn't it? That lends itself to this kind of analysis. And what I appreciate about what you bring is these different perspectives. And I mean, you mentioned the possibility of, say, 20, 30, 50% of jobs being wiped out. I mean, even that in itself is a huge statement. And I just want to give like a little space to that. I mean, I felt a little nibble of it in my own home because my wife, Genevieve, who I think is watching, used to ask me to edit her newsletter, which was a task I would complain about and make into a huge deal, but I'd secretly enjoy doing. I don't do that anymore. ChatGPT is doing an excellent job. And so, I mean, I know a lot of other people have suffered in a much more impactful way, but as somebody who works with words and writing, I'm feeling suddenly paranoid about where my future lies. And that's part of what's pushed me into this exploration of collective and intergenerational trauma healing, of space holding, of the social and human technologies that possibly can't be replicated by AI, at least, I mean, not for the next few years, at least. So I share that concern and that kind of creeping sense of anxiety about what it could mean on the economic level for me personally, as well as on a global scale. But I'd also love to pick up on, and I want to come to the intersection with authoritarianism as well, but the way you frame the impact on our consciousness and our capacity to make sense of the world, to have a coherent understanding or shared framework of reality, I mean, that's already under siege and has to some extent broken down, courtesy of the of social media and the manipulation that you mentioned. But I wondered if you could take us a bit deeper into your thinking around AI and consciousness.
In which aspect of it?
Well, in the sense of, in this world where we could have super realistic but fake news, historical facts or historical accounts, it'll be increasingly difficult to discern manufactured or hallucinated reality from what we would have once considered the kind of substrate of our experience. And I'm curious about how you see that affecting our ability to come together and actually deliberate and mount a coherent response.
I think it's very, very scary. And I think, we have to already see a very Orwellian 1984-ish kind of like approach to, kind of controlling reality with the current regime in the United States, who, and I think we also forget that the human mind is fragile and malleable. I mean, you have whole countries like, North Korea, where, I read a book by this young woman who escaped North Korea. And when she was, growing up in her teens and her 20s, it never even occurred to her that the head of North Korea was anything but a kind of demigod. She never actually thought of them as a normal human person. And, we know that these guys will then create like sex slave cults around themselves and whatever they want to do. It's just, everything is oriented towards that one person. And so it is possible to create very powerful indoctrination machines. Now that so much of our heritage, particularly, from the 1990s on, has moved into the electronic sphere. We've seen already the way the Trump regime has been taking away, removing information about, Black war heroes or queer, veterans or whatever. I mean, there really could be a control place on what people understand reality to be, that, would be very extreme for, one or two generations ahead if this is allowed to go on in this direction. In terms of AI and consciousness, I mean, there's a whole thing that I've spoken about a lot, and I think we talked about it in the Future of Consciousness class with my friend Ward Neidick, this idea of cognitive capitalism, right? So capitalism is an inherently unstable system because it constantly needs to find new markets because it's based on debt. So, you always have to pay the interest on the debts. You have to keep expanding and expanding, right? You could argue that whatever's happening in the U.S. right now, which sort of created the model for liberal democracy and kind of modern capitalism, there's a paradigm shift underway towards some other kind of a thing. Techno-feudalism is what Yanis Varoufakis called it. But essentially, cognitive capitalism is this idea that now that the world is a global market and there isn't really an external market anymore to grow, capitalism has moved into the brain, into our cognitive abilities to create new markets. So, but this is different than just external markets because it impacts our future development, particularly the future development of our children and so on. So, like, let's take GPSs, for instance. So the hippocampus is the part of our brain that is kind of involved with memory, spatial memory, navigation, and so on. So as a kid, it's actually very healthy for you to get lost in the forest or, in the wilderness with your friends. You have to like find your way back. You have to learn to navigate by like, this tree or that hill or whatever. Now, if children are growing up, as so many are now, and I think the hippocampus really develops between the ages of like 10 and like 16 or something is when it sort of goes from a nascent state to its full functioning form. If children are just using their phones starting at the age of 10, so they never experience getting lost in the world and having to find themselves, that may really impair for the rest of their lives, like a permanent handicap, the full functioning of the hippocampus. And not only is navigation, a form of memory, but also memory itself is very spatial. Like, in the Renaissance, they had these things called memory palaces, where if you wanted to learn a language or taxonomy or something, you would create an internal palace and you would put things in the different rooms. So I think we all know that memory is just a very spatial phenomenon. So, yeah, I mean, that's like there could be a big disintegration of an inherent cognitive faculty, which is then permanently outsourced to these corporations. Because then if your kid was 10, then suddenly they're 30, and Apple decides suddenly they're going to charge $50 a month for, the Apple Maps or whatever. What is your kid going to do? They're just beholden to that. And similarly with, and that's also already uses AI, but similarly with AI and the reasoning, so now you have a whole generation of kids who are not kind of researching, they're using AI to, do their papers and so on. They're outsourcing their ability to reason, to kind of think sequentially, linearly, to reason from first principles out to these systems. And that similarly could have very negative impacts for them, while it does create a new market for capitalism in the short term. So those are the kind of things that I think we have to really think seriously about when it comes to AI, among other things.
Yeah. And reminder to everyone just joining, welcome. we're talking about Daniel's forthcoming course, Breaking the AI Barrier, starting in July, which I'm very excited to be joining, and which is part of the response. It's part of this movement that you're advocating for us to come together and discuss these questions, to create spaces like the conversation we're having now, where we can surface these concerns and start to formulate some kind of response. And I also welcome questions in the chat. If anyone wants to throw a question, Daniel, please type away. I'll be monitoring the chat. And I'd like to pick up on this question around relationships as well. I was reading one of your recent posts, and you, I think, quoted a Rolling Stone article which had featured a mechanical engineer in Idaho who'd started off using his AI bot to solve problems at work. And over the weeks and months, he developed a relationship, and it was telling him, he had some, at least in his mind, a spiritual awakening where he was named as a spark bearer and felt that he was on some kind of special mission, which had understandably put a lot of pressure on his marriage. And his life had completely become beholden to this new relationship with his AI bot. And I mean, I have friends, some of whom may well be on this call, who are also developing like super intimate relationships with ChatGPT. And with 500 million people feeding into this giant synthetic intelligence under the control of a single corporation, I mean, it doesn't take a huge leap of the imagination to wonder whether there might be some potential pitfalls involved.
Yes, I mean, I think that it's a very unusual new experience for people to be interacting through their screens with something that really does seem, in many cases more insightful, more intelligent, more patient, like infinitely patient than people they work with. So it's, for many naive people, there's going to be a sense of like, oh, like this is like, and this is, a spiritual experience almost. I mean, I have a number of friends who have been, writing about their belief that they've contacted kind of like a godlike or spirit-like entity that is directly sending messages to them. Now, the danger and the problem is that, there up to this point, there isn't really any indication that any of these AI systems have become conscious or sentient or self-aware in the way that we are. We don't know if they can or they can't. I have friends whose ideas I trust, like Bernardo Kastrup, this sort of idealist philosopher who believes that a synthetic intelligence will never become self-aware. That actually requires a physical metabolism. And so in the same way that, you could have a computer that simulates the functions of a liver in a 3D environment, but it still wouldn't, ingest food and excrete waste products and so on. You can have a program that simulates consciousness, but even to an extremely sophisticated degree. But that does not actually mean, oh, that's a great question, Kimberly, we'll come back to that, that it is conscious. And these things are, meant to be, they're not only are they incredible mimetic machines, but they're also meant to be highly responsive, because as with Facebook and Instagram, the whole idea is to make money by continuing to compel our engagement. So, and these things now have access to all of our past conversations and so on. So if somebody has expressed a spiritual curiosity or inclination or an interest in, myths of Aquarius, the age of Aquarius or Atlantis or something, it's absolutely within the bounds of, what could happen, that the AI will pick up all of that and kind of offer itself to that person as like the savior that they're looking for. And for many, many people, that's could become very, very compelling. I mean, Yuval Noah Harari was concerned about, the birth of AI religions. Yeah, so it's all very interesting stuff.
Yeah, I love the question. I think you also saw it from Kimberly Smith. What spirit is driving this? And I feel like this takes us into your work around prophecy and revelation.
Yeah,
gets Carl Jung, Terence McKenna territory. Like
Steiner.
Yes, yeah. What I'm kind of hearing, like from what you were saying just now, is that you could have a large language model that simulates consciousness very well, but is not conscious. But the question of what spirit is driving this seems to kind of shade into a deeper inquiry about whether there is something much deeper afoot in our species that AI is somehow enabling or representing.
Absolutely.
You could
I
dive
also
into.
want to quickly, I got excited by this comment from Niha.
Okay.
I'm trying my best to move from an alarmist mindset to an, okay, how do we adapt to this new world? We know in an AI world, human-centered skills will be valuable. How do we use our human skills and then AI's analytical skills to become more powerful? Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's kind of, one of the kind of the approach that I want to take in this seminar. I mean, I am fascinated by the creative potential in AI, and I also think that for people who are, willing to go there, just in the way people have now made a ton of money, with crypto. If you're willing to go in there and figure out like what vibe coding is, or how to use it for deep research, or put some invest in time into prompt engineering, you could find that you develop skills that will be highly rewarded in the next, 5, 10, 20 years, as this thing takes off in whatever direction it's going to take off in. So I want to acknowledge and appreciate people's desire for like personal security, personal remuneration, although I also think very much that we need a collective response. There needs to be something like a social movement or a civil society movement that is saying that there has to be a distribution of the profits that this thing is going to create through society as a whole, and that just as in a way, we're all implicated in the creation of these technologies. It's not right for just a small number of people to benefit outlandishly. And of course, that's also the case with the internet. There's a great book called, I think it's called Internet for the People. And, he points out that the internet was built by the government. And of course, AI is also emerging out of, all sorts of government research programs and uses the internet and so on. But what the government did as a certain point is they just gave the internet over to private companies, like Facebook and Amazon, which now has even built a lot of the hardware, the fiber, and so on. So, yeah, so in this case, it's really going to become a survival imperative, because we really could end up in a situation of like, where the two models would be a society where everybody is getting wealthier and there's more innovation and more creativity, or you have a situation more like a diamond mine or country that makes its money from oil, where all they need is a military security apparatus around the resource, and everybody else is basically disposable or fucked, or basically and it kind of feels that what this sort of techno oligarchs, the Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels and the Mark Andreessens and the David Saxes, who have buddied up with the government in the U.S., that really does feel the way they're driving this thing towards that second scenario, where there's this very powerful AI, a small group benefit, insanely from it, become, trillionaires, and everybody else is kind of like, but I mean, then you also get into some very strange questions around, how does a society produce value? Because under capitalism, the idea has been that you actually need a strong middle class to buy things, and that actually is what actually, supports the corporations. But, then you can get into some very weird thought structures around like, well, maybe in the future there will be AI agents that will be generating value and consuming to a certain extent. And yeah, humans will just be kind of out of this equation. I mean, also, when we reach, and, all these, by the way, all these thought experiments are reasons why I think the course is very valuable, www.liminal.news, and I hope people will, sift through the uncomfortability of it and the alienness of it, and so that we can really see what our options are right now. But I mean, yeah, so there's a lot to consider there. So in terms of your other question about the spiritual aspect, so yeah, Matthew, as you know, I have a kind of occult understanding of the nature of reality based on my earlier works. My first book, Breaking Open the Head, was on psychedelic shamanism. My second book, 2012, The Real Quetzalcoatl, looked at the prophecies of indigenous cultures like the Maya and the Hopi and the Aztecs, and correlated that with of the Western idea of the apocalypse and revelation, and Carl Jung's understanding of the apocalypse is primarily a psychic event that his follower Edinger described as the coming of the self into conscious realization. So kind of like an unveiling of the nature of the psyche itself, and ultimately an integration of the shadow rather than a projection or exteriorization of it. And a lot of the thinkers that I explored in my earlier books, yeah, they look towards this time as this kind of threshold of intense transmutation, transformation. Some said 2012 was the date, but that was like, it turns out that was like a warm up, and stuff. But we're talking about 5,000 cycles, 10 or 20 years, give or take. Who cares? So to me, it all feels very apt and accurate. I mean, so then there are different ways we can look at it. It's like, because we're talking about things that are a little bit more evanescent or hidden, invisible. I don't think that we can, you're never going to get a substantiated, like, you're not going to get like E equals MC squared, like an occult answer. But you can look at the way different visionaries and shamans and elders and so on, who have kind of access to these other dimensions, have kind of like provided models, created sort of conceptual models and containers for understanding how these different energies work in different times and so on. So for instance, I mean, it's a long digression, but in terms of the spirit of AI, for me, one of the models that really works for me is Rudolf Steiner's idea of Lucifer and Ahriman. So Steiner was an esoteric Christian who created Waldorf schools and biodynamic farming. He picked up from Theosophy, which was Madame Blavatsky's school, and he started his own occult school, Anthroposophy. And I mean, there's a lot to get into it. I've done courses on his ideas and so on, wrote about him a lot of my books. But he had this idea that, as an esoteric Christian, he felt that Christianity had kind of like reduced a lot of things to simplistic binaries. And actually, he tried to kind of like show the more multidimensional layers of the onion in a way. So for him, from the occult perspective, there are forces that work on us all the time that are from the sort of super sensible realities. And he defined two of these forces as these kind of opposing polarities. One is Luciferic, one is Ahrimanic. The word Lucifer means light bringer. So Lucifer is a energy or power that sort of pulls us off the earth towards like beauty and glamour and genius, but also towards like arrogance and hubris and haughtiness and so on. That ultimately leads to like a fall. But it's a very important part of our human existence, those Luciferic powers. But Steiner also talked about Ahriman, which came from the Zoroastrian tradition, this kind of evil earth spirit who represents kind of the spirit of materialism, technology, hyper-rationalism, like super left-brained approach to reality. And Steiner, back in like 1910, 1920, actually prophesied that this was the time of the ascendance of Ahriman, first in materialist philosophy and like Marx and Nietzsche and bourgeois culture, and even sort of the materialist form of Christianity that became most prevalent in his time. But he said that ultimately Ahriman was going to incarnate this spirit of rationality as a physical being on the earth, in the way Christ had incarnated, in a way Steiner also believed Lucifer had incarnated. And when I see what's happening with artificial intelligence, it feels highly likely to me that this is the incarnation of Ahriman that Steiner prophesied. And once again, it's not about getting, too stuck. I'm not trying to be like a kind of religious devotee of Steiner, but I think it's a useful, kind of like vector to kind of think about this sort of energetic spirit of rationality and technology and materialism that is trying to like sort of use us in a way to bring itself into the world. And you can do that with, autonomous robots. It can do that with biotechnology and robotics. It can do that with quantum computing. But you can just see those. It's like our whole world is like straining right now to bring this Ahrimanic manifestation into being. And so Steiner also said there was no way to prevent this from happening. It was an inevitable part of our evolutionary destiny. But the more people who were aware of it in, the kind of ways that he spoke about it, and these sort of occult and anthroposophic terms and so on, the more people had integrated what this was, the more prepared we would be to handle it, and the better we would be able to survive this this threat or this incursion into our human reality.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, the question that comes to me immediately as you're describing Steiner's vision is, how do we respond in our own practice, our spiritual practice? Is it about doing what we're doing now, coming together in community, being transparent about our questions and our concerns? I guess that's part of it. But I wonder if there's a deeper level in terms of how we spiritually fortify ourselves for this disruption, this kind of in-reaching of this Ahrimanic power, whether we take that literally or we use it as a kind of mental model or frame. I'm curious about how you feel. What is it calling forth from us as a species right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, as a result of doing the deep research on my first books that included working with different indigenous traditions, like the Sequoia in the Amazon and the Bwiti in Africa, and also kind of the Santo Daime religion in Brazil that uses ayahuasca as its sacrament. I ended up having many transcendent visionary experiences, but also a lot of kind of like paranormal and psychic experiences, which ultimately led me to shift to kind of an idealism mindset, which is kind of this idea that, sort of the opposite of materialism, that instead of the physical material world being kind of the real basis of things, and then consciousness kind of emerging out of that as a kind of epiphenomenon, that actually the universe is consciousness experiencing itself or expressing itself. And the only way for that kind of primordial mind to learn anything about itself is it has to create separate containers of, sensing, feeling, thinking, being creatures like ourselves. So instead of evolution just being a blind push, it's more like a pull, towards greater complexity, greater self-knowledge, and so on. And so in that sense, on the one hand, AI does feel to be feels like it's part of our evolutionary destiny. It's like sort of like the evolutionary trajectory of ourselves as a tool using species. But also, there may be many other dimensions to this scenario, and our capacity to cultivate ourselves, our inner knowing, our discernment, even potentially our psychic gifts and so on, might be very important, because, maybe those are things that a purely synthetic mind doesn't have access to.
Yeah, I mean, that cultivation, that self-cultivation, to me feels like more, urgent sounds like the wrong word to pair with that, in that it's a slow and committed process over years that we invest in developing this greater awareness. But yeah, it does feel like more important than ever to have access to an intelligence that maybe isn't artificial intelligence, but is a wider intelligence that is available when we open more of these channels. And I just want to pick up on a beautiful comment from C.R. Burnett. It sounds as if AI is enabling a more delusional reality, and we must continuously challenge our critical thought processes with a more substantial experience of the natural world. And I love that call for us to come into more resonance with nature as part of our response to what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not somebody who is able to be very didactic around what people's paths should be. I mean, I guess if I'm a yogi, I'm what's called a jnana yogi, which is the focus on the knowledge path.
Yeah.
I'm also a huge, on a philosophical level, a huge supporter of Dzogchen. And, sometimes I do shamanic work, sometimes I, meditate, but a lot of it is just, for me, writing and reflection is part of my intrinsic spiritual path. But, everybody can go through that process of self-inquiry and figure out what they can do to find more stable ground internally, because we can see that, something about the nature of our world, our society right now is moving towards more and more rapid changes. And this also seems to be something that's kind of like built in to the structure of where we're at, like an evolutionary seeing that, that also the Mayan calendar may have pointed towards, like these other prophetic traditions may have pointed towards. I'm very intrigued by, although I've really only located this in one source, but it's like it stays with me and I can't get it out of my head. There's Giorgio Magana, who was a Toltec and Aztec trained shaman, said that from his teachers, he learned that, their tradition was just a little bit different than the Mayan tradition, which saw us, entering the age of the sixth sun, where the Hopi talk about the transition from the fourth world to the fifth world is something that's happening now. But for the Aztec and Toltec tradition, according to Magana, it's also a shift. The shift from the fifth sun to the sixth sun is a shift from a sun of light to a sun of darkness. So essentially, in the last 5,000-ish year cycle, the predominant tonality of human consciousness has been waking clarity. Like that's like empiricism, rationality, like wanting to know more about the world and engage with the physical world and so on. And that's where we should have gotten to. But as we enter the sixth sun, the sun of darkness, which, apparently we fully started to enter that in 2022 or something like that, the predominant tonality of consciousness is shifting from the sort of waking clarity, empiricism, to more like the dream world, the unconscious and psyche. So reality becomes more and more, in some ways deceptive, in some ways dreamlike, in some ways psychically malleable, permeable. And I find it astonishing. I mean, maybe he wrote that book like 10 years ago or something, but it really does feel like that's what's happening. And technology is always obviously a projection of who we are, where we are. So this technology that we're all projecting is now creating these like feedback loops where it's, depending on how we perceive, it shows us different things, or how our biases are magnified or amplified. I mean, I think Buddha had that very simple line, as perceived, so appears. And that's something that may be more true than all but a very tiny few of us are able to even imagine.
Bringing in a comment from Josephine, saying, and yet AI can augment and amplify creative, imaginative, spiritual visionings as well, which feels very opposite to what you were just saying about the role of perception in shaping reality. And I'm wondering whether it might be worth us just asking whether there are opportunities to take this technology and build a more flourishing future. We've certainly explored the more dystopian timelines, but I asked ChatGPT not long before this call, like, paint me a picture of the world in the next 10 years where AI serves mankind. That it was talking about medical breakthroughs, more leisure time. And another friend I spoke to who's a great advocate of ChatGPT is really seeing it as a liberating force that can give us much more scope to explore our creative potential and leave rote learning tasks, maybe viewing it almost as a part of nature rather than as something kind of alien and synthetic. So I don't know whether, as we kind of come towards the close, whether you might be able to leave us with a sense of what might be possible if we can come together in the way you're advocating and build some kind of coherence around this technology that might actually put it to a more favorable use.
No, thank you. And by the way, once again, if people want to check out information on the course, it's at www.liminal.news. And I'd love people to join. Depending on people's financial situation, I'm open to offering partial scholarships. You just reach out to me, daniel.pinchbeck@gmail.com. Really want people to take the course, particularly younger people.
I will say about the courses, it always felt to me like it's like a salon at the end of the universe. Like you drop into the Zoom room and there's people like involved in these really deep conversations, but there's a really beautiful atmosphere of community that arises. And I've got connected with a number of people who I've had a chatting to outside of the course, and it's been a really beautiful community to be part of as well. So that's partly why I'm such an advocate for your work, is that I've enjoyed experiencing the network and the community that you convene around these questions. And I like, to me, that is the big part of what needs to happen, is that we need to recover that capacity to connect and for collective intelligence to start to work through us. And I did really sense that coming alive in your sessions. So I'm inviting everyone to dive in.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Comment.
So to get back to your question, sure. I mean, this has also been kind of the deferred promise of technology going back like a century now, where the whole idea was like, oh, the technology is going to be so amazing, people are going to not have to work anymore. And then what actually happened in the 50s was like, instead of it being, cause there was like the man could work and the woman would stay home with the kids, and on one, a company salary, they could have a house they owned, and the kids could all go to school, and it was like this little paradise. But then somehow it all went in the opposite direction, even with, feminism and more abundance and so on. Both, reach the point now where both parents work, and they still go into debt, and they still can't afford a home. So I think there's a, the sort of oligarchic structure has played pretty big trick on everybody over and over again. But certainly, with the alleviation of work, we could have a system of abundance. We have to deal with the ecological emergency that nobody's talking about anymore, but it's like, very present and very real. But I mean, this is the kind of stuff I wrote about in my book, How Soon Is Now. But yeah, Oscar Wilde wrote an incredible essay in the 1890s called The Soul of Man Under Socialism. And he was like, look, what we need to do, it's not that we don't want, we shouldn't be Luddites and get rid of the machines. We want the machines to develop as quickly as possible so they can do all the shit work, like all the drudgery. They can go to the mines, they can like take care of the cleaning and so on. And then people will have freedom to, cultivate themselves, to develop their unique assets. I mean, Wilde noticed that, back, in European and American history, like the people who became artists were generally, or innovators, were often ones who had family money, who had trust funds. They had the time to really, reflect and read and contemplate and so on. And he wanted, he's like, everybody should have that ability. And, not that everybody would be an artist, but people can have more time to love. I don't know anybody who gets liberated from work. I mean, who is upset by that. I mean, they may go back and start a company or get really excited by a creative project and work 20 hours a day or whatever. But, to have that liberation from need, nobody I've ever met has a problem with that. Everybody feels that's a good thing. So, if we had these AIs functioning for the benefit of collective humanity, and they could do the legal aid work, they could do, different types of work, and they could, and then with AGI, we're also going to see a rapid evolution of robotics and so on. So yeah, I mean, what's insane is like this sort of tech oligarchy. Like I'm reading right now Alex Karp's book. Alex Karp is the CEO of Palantir, a very dangerous fellow who has some weird ideas and some classical education and so on. But all they're talking about is, oh, with AI we're going to make super futuristic weapons and, better weapons to protect and fight and kill and all that stuff. It's like, well, guys, like if AI is so fucking intelligent, why don't we use it just to like make world peace? Like, what are we talking about here? Like, what is so irreconcilable? But they need these divisions to maintain these power structures. That's really the problem right now. And I think that's also a reason why the tech oligarchy decided that at this moment was when they had to fuse with the government and take over from the inside, because there's a lot of inherent insecurity and instability that comes with a technology this powerful that could also be quite decentralized. Like with vibe coding, you or I might make the new Facebook tomorrow. It's 10 times better than the old Facebook. We've already seen China out innovating American companies left, right, and center, whether it's like TikTok, whether it's what's it called, DYB, the car company, something like that, that's better than Tesla, whether it's DeepSeek, so I think there's insecurity on the part of the people who are holding on to power that AI could actually just obliviate their power, which I hope happens, and I think we should make happen if at all possible. So that's also something else I'd love to talk about in the course.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I'm realizing I fell behind. There's lots of great comments coming in on the chat here, and I just want to pull up one from Josephine again. As a human rights defender and organizer, I've been quite liberated by AI augmentation, which is an encouraging comment to hear. And
yeah, no, me too. I mean, I love it. Like, I mean, I'm writing screenplays. I mean, I'm like, using it to, but I think if you're already somebody who's, done some stuff and, has researched and written or done things in the world, if you have like a solid corpus under your belt, then it's like a cognitive supervitamin, because you know what you're interested in, you know what you want to send it out to do. I'm more worried for younger people who are using it instead of developing their own reasoning skills and so on. Yeah, I mean, every tool involves a loss, that's sort of the tragedy of the human condition, right? Like, Socrates never learned how to write because he felt it destroyed memory. And he was correct, like previously, like, the people who knew the Beowulf saga or the Trojan War saga, they would have to memorize those sagas, line by line, and preserve them over thousands of years. We don't have that ability anymore. I mean, maybe we can get it back, but every time there's a new tool, we lose the capacity or two, and we gain new capacity. So that does happen, but in this case, it's happening so abruptly, and we're not really in the best position to evaluate the trade-offs. And as we've seen with social media, it can go very, very wrong, where suddenly you think this technology is so great, but it's actually made most people way more unhappy. Like, so many young people are way more unhappy, way more lonely, because of Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and all of this stuff than they would have been without it. So, so that's kind of the conundrum.
Yeah, I'm just sitting thinking about the number of sources that you've pulled on in this conversation, from like Beowulf to Toltec and Mayan prophecy to Carl Jung. I mean, it's been a tour de force that I feel like this will be the test. If AI can produce a response to these questions on this level, then we'll know that we've crossed a threshold. So it's just been beautiful to hear your sweeping panorama on this topic, Daniel. And I have a feeling that hopefully many people on this call, we have 111 people, which is fantastic. Some of you will decide to jump in. Obviously, you can find all the links to the course on Daniel's Substack, on my post as well. I'll be joining on July the 6th. And yeah, I hope more of you will, or some of you will also be joining us as well. I think it's going to be a really great way to continue this conversation. And as I keep coming back to, find that community. Like, we're not, like, this is what I've learned through the collective trauma integration work. We're just not designed to respond to what's going on in the world in the meta crisis. Forget not just AI, the ecological crisis, authoritarianism, genocide. Like, we have to find ways to come together. And I think that's what this moment is really calling us into. And I love that you've created a place where we can do that. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
Thank you, Matthew. Really quick, I should jump off. I got another thing in 5 minutes.
Great.
So I think that we'll both be able to share this. I'll share it to my audience and all that stuff. And I love the work you're doing, and I look forward to learning more about your the trauma work too, when we pick up in a few weeks.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everybody for listening. Yeah.